From the incredibly complicated nature of his birth to his endearing sacrifice on the battlefield to protect his little brother, Portgas D lived an extremely tumultuous and complicated life defined by hardships, triumph, and sacrifice. Born to the world the son of the Pirate King, protected by the hero of the Marines, and brother to a future Yonko and future revolutionary, to becoming a elite commander under the legendary Whitebeard and having a war fought for his freedom, Ace lived an endearing life that made such a significant impact that the shadow he casts over the story still lingers even nearly 600 chapters since his death, with him still having prominent and significant connections to the story to this day. The story that Oda has told and continues to tell with Ace shows that he is still finding ways to incorporate this notable character in his manga, making it so that Ace remains a focal point or at least maintains some relevancy and connections to some of the story beats transpiring even as recently as Wano. Not to mention the massive event of Ace's death was used as a major turning point for the series, it remains one of One Piece's most significant events. Ace has played an extremely vital role in the series, even when he wasn't always front and center, and thus this complicated character leaves a lot to be explored and discussed, starting with events prior to his birth to even beyond his death. My name is Champazard, and this is the tragic life and death of Fire Fist Ace. Prior to even his birth into the world, Ace was already in an extreme and pragmatic situations as the circumstances surrounding his birth were a critical plot element of the Marineford arc. Roger, who had just become the Pirate King, having knowledge of his impending death due to his illness, spent his final days where he seemingly conceived Ace with Portgas D. Roger knew shortly before his death that he had a child on the way, which led to him making a direct request to Garp to protect his son. Regarding Ace's mother Rouge, we ultimately learn that she avoided persecution despite the world government seeking out Roger having a potential child in his last days, but miraculously holding her pregnancy for 20 months through sheer willpower before finally birthing Ace. Rouge would die shortly afterwards as Ace would ultimately end up in Garp's care and be introduced to grow up alongside a young Luffy. During his childhood, a strong resentment for his father began to fester for Ace, making his life even more problematic as the general public of the world, who only heard of Roger's exploits to the likes of the world government, had a negative perspective of the Pirate King and viewed him as a monster, which heavily influenced Ace into disdain for his biological father. Ace knew that if people knew of his actual parentage, he would be hated and persecuted for the sins of his father, and Ace would curse his father for bringing him into a world where he would be hated. Ace was given the name of his father, Gol D Ace, but due to his disdain for the Pirate King, he adopted the name of his mother, thus becoming Portgas D Ace. Ace's childhood in the Goa Kingdom was filled with complications. He grew up alongside a young Luffy and had a complicated relationship with the likes of Garp. Later on, he would meet Sabo as well, which eventually led to their friendship blossoming into adopted brotherhood. Tragedy ultimately struck when they witnessed what almost resulted in Sabo's death. Ace would live the rest of his life oblivious to Sabo's survival, and witnessing what seemed like his brother's death led Ace to becoming more protective of Luffy, his only surviving brother. Despite the lack of a blood relationship between Ace and Garp, they did have a grandfather-son-esque relationship. They often clashed during Ace's childhood due to Garp's aggressive and rambunctious nature towards him and the young Luffy, and his desire to mold them into ideal marine soldiers for adulthood. Ace and Luffy becoming pirates soured his relationship with Garp, and we would be granted further insight into this complicated relationship during the Paramount War and the events leading up to it. All things considered, Ace did live a relatively turbulent childhood, though it could be considered fairly peaceful knowing his lineage. A childhood which he was granted while being under the watchful eye of Garp. Though he grew up doubting whether he should have been born and harboring a strong resentment towards the father he couldn't acknowledge beyond very few people, he endured beyond just the hardships imposed on him by Roger being his father. Losing Sabo, who he deemed a brother, and being unable to save him played a significant role in how protective he became of Luffy in the future, as Sabo's death no doubt deepened the bond between the two. This spawned a sense of protectiveness which ultimately played a vital role in Ace's final days. Ace always doubted his desire to live, but openly acknowledged that his brothers played a role that made him want to in the first place. He also had complicated relationships with the likes of Dodon, who he ultimately learned that the two did care for each other, as Ace proclaimed he was grateful to her when setting out from the Goa Kingdom. Ultimately, Ace was set on his own to become a pirate, to embark on a new adventure that would significantly change the course of his life. After enduring a childhood where he resented his father, doubted his own desire to live, and lost a brother, he eventually overcame many of these issues that inspired him to set out to pursue his own dreams, just as Luffy would do a few short years later. This would signify a distinct shift in the course of Ace's life, as this would put into motion many of the events we would witness further into the series. In the few short years between Ace's farewell to Luffy and his untimely demise in Marineford, he had a significant impact and embarked on many adventures in that short time period. Before Ace ever joined the Whitebeard Pirates, he'd already been making a name for himself in both the Grand Line and New World. He set out to make a statement by dismantling the Four Emperors, a goal which eventually led him to clash with Whitebeard. But prior to those events, Ace would become a pirate captain himself. Shortly into his journey after becoming a pirate, he met Mas Deuce. After some initial issues, which included the two splitting the Marinomi, which Ace only gained the powers of, they overcame their issues, and the two formed an alliance which eventually paved the way for the rise of the Spade Pirates, led by Ace himself. The escapades of Ace and his crew became well known, as Ace became a recognizable name in the pirate world. He defeated the likes of one of the 7 warlords, leaving a vacancy in the system. He had encounters with the Marines and bounty hunters, and engaged in battles that awakened his dormant conqueror's haki. He even received an invitation to become one of the 7 warlords, which he promptly refused. He even acquired a bounty expressing that of 100 million berries, and made his intent known of taking down the Yonko. Shortly after entering the New World, he managed to track down Shanks to thank him for assisting Luffy several years earlier. At this point, Ace's journey would eventually have a significant impact of future events of the story, which kept his presence felt even in recent arcs such as Wano. It had been foreshadowed in the Paramount War during a flashback that Ace had visited Wano, as he helped to create Little Oar Jr. a hat from techniques he had learned during his visit. We gain insight into these events through Luffy's encounters with those H touched during the Wano arc. Ace met the likes of Otama, who he grew close to. This ultimately led to Otama looking up to Ace to the point that she even wanted to join his crew. She was left devastated by the news of his death years later after learning of his connection to Luffy. He also formed a connection with Yamato, who would go on to become a key ally of Luffy during the Wano arc. Ace spoke of Luffy during their encounter, as Yamato began to look forward to the day that the two would ultimately meet. He even told Yamato of Luffy's dream, which matched up to Roger's, which Yamato learned from Oden's journal. They even exchanged Viver cards before parting ways. As I stated before, we had learned of Ace's visiting Wano during the Marineford arc, but didn't learn the contents of those adventures until hundreds of chapters later. Things that Oda set up many arcs ago made Ace a significant player in some key events even after his death. This demonstrated that Oda wished to maintain Ace's presence in the story even in death. It's a style of writing by Oda that enables him to visit previously established events of Ace's life that he can visit and expand upon to further and deepen the story when needed. This is what he did when exploring Ace's time in Wano after Luffy met the likes of Otama and Yamato. It established to the readers that Ace had goals he never got to achieve, and that even in his short time, he made a significant impact on the lives of many through his actions. Events that would even benefit his brother in the years following his death. But the events that would begin to shape the ultimate trajectory of Ace's life would begin shortly after his time in Wano. The path that led him to Whitebeard, which ultimately culminated with some of the most significant moments in One Piece. As Ace had made it a goal of his to dismantle the existing Yonko, Whitebeard became a natural target of his. Prior to meeting Whitebeard, Ace had an encounter with Jinbei, a climactic altercation that paved the way for many events of the future, such as Jinbei being inspired to stand alongside Luffy. On Fisherman Island, Ace had burned the flag of Blackbeard, which had led to Jinbei tracking him down to prevent him from pursuing Whitebeard. This resulted in a 5-day-long clash where both men collapsed from exhaustion. Shortly after the battle, Whitebeard himself arrived. Upon defeating Ace, he extended his hand to him and asked Ace to join his crew, which Ace stubbornly refused. Ace didn't react well to his time on Whitebeard's ship at first. Ace definitely was an arrogant individual, so he maintained his determination to defeat Whitebeard, as he didn't take kindly to being unable to defeat him. Ace attempted to kill Whitebeard over 100 times, with each attempt being easily thwarted. During this time, Ace was shocked by the dynamics of the crew's inner workings. He didn't perfectly understand why the crew referred to Whitebeard as Pops. This confusion and refusal to adjust to this new setting no doubt stemmed from Ace's own issues with his paternal father, Roger. After learning more of the father-son relationship and dynamic their crew had with their captain, Ace took on Whitebeard's mark and became a proud member of the group, which resulted in him viewing Whitebeard as a father figure, which aside from Garp, he liked growing up. But how Whitebeard became such a father figure to Ace is deeper than that, and not so simple. As we already know, Ace had no relationship with his father, Gol D, the Pirate King, and Ace resented him for being a criminal as Ace grew up seeing other people around the world resented him. Naturally, no, Roger wasn't a bad guy, but the world government painted him out as an evil villain, which made Ace think he was a criminal as well. So Ace always longed for a father figure and acceptance for what he wanted to become. Naturally, Garp did somewhat fill the role of being Ace's father figure, but Ace and Garp never really saw eye to eye, and they had many disputes. Their interests never truly aligned. Ace wanted one thing out of life, and Garp wanted another thing for him. Ace wanted to travel the world to be free and being a pirate, but Garp's ideal aspirations for Luffy and Ace were for them to both become strong marines, following in his footsteps. There's a great distance between the two, and when Ace did become a pirate, it only disappointed Garp even more and further complicated their relationship. Whitebeard didn't care about any of that. Whitebeard wanted to live freely and enjoy life with his family, with no particular goal in mind. Whitebeard loved to adventure and travel the world with his found family, the ones he called his sons. Ace even expected that Whitebeard would disown him upon finding out that Roger was his father, though Whitebeard seemingly already knew that, and didn't care whatsoever. And this may have even inspired Whitebeard to try to protect Ace even more, out of respect to his old friend. Ace longed for a father figure, and Whitebeard fit that role well. Everybody on the cruise saw Whitebeard as their father, as many called him Pops. He was very protective of all of them, as his only dream was to really just to have a family at the end of the day. He saw someone who was lost in the world like Ace, and wanted to give him direction, something which he ultimately did, so that's why he encouraged him him to take on his mark and become his son. Whitebeard ultimately filled the void that Ace had in his longing for a father figure, something which became very clear as Ace always maintained that Whitebeard was his one true father. The impact Whitebeard and his crew had on Ace can't be understated, as it drastically changed Ace's perspective on things and his goals. No longer did he want to take down the likes of Whitebeard, he wanted to walk alongside him and help push his captain to greater heights. Ace quickly ascended through the ranks of the group and was granted the title of 2nd Division Commander, which had last been held by Kazuki Oden many years earlier. Having concerns about this new environment, Ace revealed the truth of his parentage to Whitebeard. Whitebeard laughed it off as he saw few similarities between Ace and Roger. While Whitebeard acted surprised by this revelation here, according to Sengoku, Whitebeard was already aware of his adopted son's true lineage. Naturally, if Whitebeard knew Ace's parentage, it would make sense why he'd be protective of Ace due to his profound respect he carried for Roger. Ace had expected Whitebeard to shun him over the reveal, as he believed Roger and Whitebeard to be bitter enemies, which is far from the case, and the truth. During this time period of his life, Ace pursued liberating Wano, which Whitebeard refused. He learned about Luffy's rise to infamy from his first bounty posters. Shortly after, the events that set off a major portion of the story would transpire. Blackbeard would murder Thatch, which ultimately led to Ace pursuing Blackbeard to bring him to justice. Though hesitant at first, Whitebeard remained apprehensive about Ace pursuing Blackbeard, as he knew that teacher's up to something that could be deemed extremely dangerous. Whitebeard was likely aware of the devil fruit Blackbeard had acquired and the danger he posed, and that avenging the fallen in this situation may yield more negatives than positives. Ultimately, Ace set out in pursuit, and Whitebeard, though reluctant, didn't stop him. Whitebeard's reluctance would eventually prove to be well placed, as Ace's pursuit set off a chain of events that affected the wider One Piece world. Ace grew determined to track down Blackbeard, and several ventures for him unfolded during this time span, one of which would ultimately bring him to being reunited with his brother in Alabasta. This is where the reader was first introduced to Ace in the manga, aside from his appearance in Drum Island, and the revelation that Luffy had a brother came as quite a surprise. Ace had expected Luffy to venture to become a pirate, as it had become a goal for both of them. When Ace set out, Luffy mentioned he would venture out 3 years later to also become a pirate, something which he did as Ace became aware of some of Luffy's actions due to his growing bounty. Naturally, knowing his brother was now sailing the seas as well, he wanted to reunite with him. This was a happy reunion between the two brothers, as they even were together for a short time in Alabasta before Ace resumed his pursuit of Blackbeard. Before the brothers bid each other farewell, unaware it was the last time they would be together under happy circumstances, Ace gave Luffy a Viver card saying it would lead them back to each other in the future. This Viver card would ultimately become a critical plot point in future storylines. Luffy this Viver card as a means for him and Luffy to one day reunite, as it would lead them back to each other. It was also the first indication of Luffy that Ace was in danger. Oda established the importance of the Viver card back in Alabasta hundreds of chapters before its true significance came into play, as it was also used to symbolize Ace's death, as when Ace died, his Viver card turned to ashes. After bidding goodbye to Luffy, Ace resumed his search for Blackbeard. In this short time, he came along with the likes of Buggy, and he even became a subject of a One Piece cover story where he helped a girl reunite with her parents, as well as obtain information regarding Blackbeard from a marine ship. Ace eventually discovered Blackbeard's whereabouts. Determined to bring him to justice and to avenge the fallen Thatch, Ace engaged him in battle, as we saw. A decision that would ultimately prove deadly, as the battle resulted in Ace being overwhelmed as he was ultimately defeated. Following his defeat, Ace was turned over to the Marines, where he was imprisoned and scheduled for execution. A set of events that would become some of the most significant in the entire One Piece story would begin to unfold from here, surrounding Ace's pending execution. Ace's imprisonment and impending execution was the beginning of the looming Paramount War, where we would see the Marines' strongest forces united against the strongest man in the world, Whitebeard, who was determined to save his son from death. Up until this point in the series, the character of Ace was mostly an enigma. We had seen him briefly in Alabasta and bits and pieces of him through a cover story in his clash with Blackbeard, but overall, Oda kept our exposure to him extremely limited, something which some would say may have been a mistake. I would have definitely enjoyed seeing Ace and feeling more connected to the character prior to Marineford, but that's just an opinion. We truly started to get a bit more insight into Ace during Impel Down. This saga, covering the imprisonment of Ace to the culmination of the war, mainly revolves around two things: Ace's imprisonment and his impending death, and Luffy's journey to save him and the difficulties he endures along the way. This is where Oda really began to expand on both brothers by developing them, making them go through hardships and giving us more insight into them as characters. We see Luffy truly struggle and feel helpless shortly after failing to save his crew at Sabaody. Now he's fighting tooth and nail to avoid seeing his beloved brother fall. We see Ace's development as we gain insight into more of his backstory and how he went from a hot-headed youngster to having a found family in the Whitebeard Pirates. Along with the inner turmoil we see him endure as he watches helplessly as his friends fight on the battlefield for his liberation, as he begins to feel responsibility for the situation. We see this at play when he questions why Whitebeard came when he left to pursue Blackbeard of his own accord. Ace began to reminisce a lot about his life with an Impel down. We see him engaging with Garp while in prison, and he discusses his resentment for Roger, his love and gratitude to his mother, and how he sees Whitebeard as his only father, as Garp laments he never wanted him and Luffy to turn to piracy. Up until this point in the series, the identity of Ace's heritage had remained a mystery. Some assumed Draken was his father due to it being stated that him and Luffy were brothers, but a big revelation regarding this arc was that Roger had a son, and Sengoku announced it to the world as Ace was on the execution platform. Even in that moment, Ace rejected that fact and maintained Whitebeard was his one true father. We witness Whitebeard's fondness for Ace as he said he ordered him to pursue Blackbeard. We also see Ace's turmoil as he witnesses the demise of Little Oars Jr. in an attempt to save him. Soon, Luffy would descend on the battlefield, and Ace's wish for Luffy to stay away, fearing for his safety, wouldn't come true. Naturally, Ace couldn't reject Luffy's resolute determination and accepted whatever fate was to come his way due to the efforts of his friends and family. The complexities of Ace's looming execution went deeper than just Ace's connection with Whitebeard and Luffy, but with Garp himself. This was demonstrated well as Garp sat beside Ace by the execution platform. Garp, although not going against his marine alignment, broke down in tears as he questioned what he should do, stating he had no sympathy for pirates, but for family he did, establishing he saw Ace as just as much his grandson as he did Luffy, despite the lack of blood relation. This makes sense as Garp had been with Ace longer than he had been with Luffy. He protected Ace at the request of Roger himself, knowing that the son shouldn't carry the sins of the father, even though other Marines like Sengoku would object to such a philosophy. Garp took Ace as a baby and oversaw his upbringing in the Goa Kingdom alongside Luffy. Garp expressed frustration at how Ace and Luffy both opted for a path of piracy, something which he very much condemned, as he struggled with the inner turmoil at being a bystander to the execution of his adoptive grandson. Ace as a child had always dealt with feeling like he shouldn't be alive, and saw the hatred civilians had for the Pirate King. All the resentment grew over the years, where Ace probably even questioned if he was worthy of love. But in these moments, he as a bystander witnessed an entire war being fought for his freedom and the lengths to which his comrades would go to see him free. Ace was shocked at Whitebeard's arrival, along with Luffy's, as he expected that no one would come for him and believed no one shouldn't due to his actions. We see the culmination of these feelings as he weeps over what's occurring on the battlefield in front of him, witnessing the countless people dedicated to saving the person that so many others had considered worthless. While there was a time that Ace had completely given up hope, eventually he gained the will to live again, as Luffy, with the help of others, successfully freed Ace from the shackles that bonded him. Ace was free, and the brothers were together again in a momentous and tear-jerking reunion, a temporary happiness for the brothers that would soon evaporate into hopeless despair.
ちゃんと助けてもらえなくてよ。
何言ってんだ。バカなこと言うな。
無駄だ。自分の命の終わりくらいわかる。
約束したじゃねえかよ。お前絶対死なねえって言ったじゃねえかよ、エース。
そうだな。サボの剣とお前みてえな世話の焼ける弟がいなきゃ俺は生きようとも思わなかった。
Ace was freed from his shackles and the brothers had a joyful reunion. They united in battle for the first time on the battlefield as they fended off their common foes. Whitebeard, content with Ace's freeing, ordered those loyal to him to return to the New World with Ace as he was make his final stand to protect them to bring his legendary life to a close. Whitebeard then asked Ace if he had been a good father, and Ace, filled with emotion, confirmed that he had. As Ace and Luffy saw a path of freedom, Sakazuki played on Ace's stubbornness and relentless devotion to Whitebeard. Ace ignored the path to escape and opted to defend Whitebeard's honor, a mistake that would cost him dearly. Ace was overwhelmed by Sakazuki, and seeing his brother in a physical state as Sakazuki opted to end the life of Luffy, Ace endured the blow meant for his brother, ultimately sacrificing his life for the one he loved the most. Many could say that Ace was stupid in this moment for refusing to ignore Sakazuki, and maybe he was, but assuming Ace's perspective, seeing the father who had gone to such great lengths to ensure his freedom, wanting to defend his honor makes sense to some. But also recklessly putting yourself into an unwinnable battle to put Whitebeard's efforts to waste also makes Ace's actions seem ridiculous to others. But that was part of who Ace was, a stubborn and reckless individual who loved fiercely and bravely fought to defend those he loved. A trait that gave him strength, but a trait that put him in many perilous situations. Ultimately, Ace didn't throw away his life in a 1v1 battle. He endured the blow intended for his brother, a blow that certainly would have also resulted in Luffy's death. After this blow, we played witness to Ace's final moments as he was succumbing to the injury inflicted upon him as he uses the last of his strength to depart his final words to Luffy. Ace, embraced in the arms of the one who loved him the most, lamented on the events of his life as it neared its tragic end. Luffy, stunned and lost for words, lets listen to the departing words of his beloved brother, unable to save him in his closing moments. The events that led to this moment have been a hot debate for many years. Many deem that it was Ace's recklessness that brought him to his demise. It had plagued him when he didn't heed Whitebeard's words regarding Blackbeard, and it did again as he refused to ignore the disparaging remarks made by Sakazuki towards Whitebeard. During Ace's final moments, we learn more about some of his regrets and dreams. He begins with telling Luffy that if it weren't for him and Sabo, he wouldn't even have a will to live. This is something Oda had previously approached when we see Ace wondering if he should even be alive due to his parentage. But Luffy and Sabo clearly had a significant impact on him to the point that it changed his perspective on life. Ace doesn't seem to be the type of person to fear death, which is clear in his final words where he states he has no regrets but has one thing that makes him want to stick around: seeing the brother who helped give him purpose fulfill his dream. Despite wishing he could stick around to see it, Ace tells Luffy that he has no doubts that he will do it because he's his brother. Ace realized he never wanted fame, but the answer to one question that Ace had his entire life: did I deserve to be born? Then, overcome with tears in his final breaths, he passes on his final words to all those who showed him love, from Whitebeard to Luffy.
今日までこんなどうしようもねえ俺を鬼の血を引くこの俺を愛してくれてありがとう。
Thank you for loving me, Ace states. Before, like so many before him, who carried the will of D, he dies with a smile on his face, content with the life he had lived, and thankful to those who loved him. In the anime, we see a flashback to a child Ace speaking to Garp and asking him if he was good that he was born. Garp simply replies that as long as he lives, Ace will figure it out eventually. And I think in Ace's final moments, he did figure out the question to the answer that loomed over him for so long. After dying in his brother's arms and witnessing the countless people fighting for his freedom, he realized he was truly loved, and the answer was yes. Ace spent his life trying to discover if he deserved to live, and nearing his death, he finally got his answer, something Luffy and so many others helped him realize. Portgas D Ace is undoubtedly an incredibly complicated character. From the incredible circumstances of his birth as being the son of the Pirate King, and his mother being pregnant for 20 months to protect him, Ace really came into the world in a miraculous way, also carrying the will of D. Ace started off with a complicated childhood, where he resented his father and had no true father figure to look up to, aside from Garp, even though they had their disputes. He created a found family with Luffy and Sabo where he took them on as adoptive brothers, but had to endure the loss of seeing Sabo die, and never learning that Sabo was actually still alive the entire time, which makes this even more tragic. And the very fact that Ace always questioned if he ever should have been born also adds to his tragedy, and that's what makes Ace's death even more complicated and tragic. He spent his whole life pursuing that answer, and in his final moments, seeing everybody that loved him fight for his freedom and safety, and seeing how far his brother also came to free him, made him realize that he actually was loved and did deserve to be born. And his whole arc is an incredibly important one to the story, as it serves as a major catalyst for Luffy's development. It had a huge impact on the One Piece world, as the Marineford War changed many things, leading to the new world and the 2-year time skip. The death of the Pirate King's son and the Yonko Whitebeard was an extremely significant event. Ace's death also inspired Luffy to realize that he had to grow stronger to protect those he still had, his crew, forcing Luffy to take a 2-year break to spend time training with Rayleigh to gather strength for the new world, because otherwise he wasn't ready at all. 2 years that all of the Straw Hats needed to grow stronger. And even after his death, as I mentioned earlier, Ace maintains a very significant part of the story, and he even played a vital role in Wano, setting up crucial relationships for Luffy in the future in the likes of Yamato and Otama, both of who proved to be useful allies to Luffy in his fight against Big Mom and Kaido. Ace's impact on the One Piece world and the story cannot be understated, and I'm sure Oda will continue to maintain to have the presence of Ace felt even in future stories. But with One Piece being so much about inherited will, Ace's brother Luffy no doubt picked up Ace's will after his death and continues to live on in his name, to achieve his dreams just as Ace believed he could do. My name is Champazard, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hit the like button, as it helps the video do well and helps the channel do well. And leaving a comment is even better than that. Let me know your thoughts on Ace's life and death and him as a character. Were there things you liked or disliked about Ace, or were there things you may have wanted to see him also do before he died? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.